What if I told you some spirits never left their graves, and tonight they might be watching you? If you love ghost stories, hit subscribe, tap like, and share this video so we can bring you even more terrifying tales. Subscribe, like, share to keep the ghosts coming. Salem has always been a town wrapped in its own shadows. Even beneath the bright neon lights of tourist shops and the cheerful chatter of visitors who come to buy trinkets and broom-shaped keychains, something unsettled lingers in the air like a fine mist. The cobblestones breathe history. The wood of its oldest houses creaks with unspoken memories. To walk the streets of Salem is to feel as though unseen eyes are fixed upon you. Eyes that do not blink, that do not belong to the living. For centuries, Salem has been synonymous with witches, with spectral accusations, with a collective madness that ended on the gallows. But behind the well-documented trials and the endless retelling of court records lies another story, seldom told in the open but whispered in corners, traded in low voices when the October fog hangs thick. It is the story of a doll, not just any doll, but a vessel carved by grief and preserved by rumor. A doll said to carry within it the spirit of the damned. Those who believe in such things call it the haunted Ghost Doll of Salem. No one agrees on its exact origins. Some say it was carved by a condemned mother for her daughter, wood smoothed by trembling hands inside the jail where she awaited her hanging. Others claim it was fashioned by an accused child herself. Fingers splintered as she shaped a figure to keep her company during the endless nights of prayer and weeping. A few say the doll was never human-made at all, but conjured, manifested by the desperation of the dying, a vessel born from terror. Whatever the truth, the story always begins the same way, with a child named Temperance Goodwin. Temperance was no more than 10 years old in the year of Salem's frenzy. She was small, pale, with watchful eyes that never seemed to blink long enough. Her mother, Mercy Goodwin, was one of the many who felt a suspicion. Accused by neighbors of witchcraft after livestock sickened and bread turned black in their ovens, Mercy was dragged into the jailhouse with chains biting her wrists, and her child, cast adrift, was left with little more than fear and silence. But from her cell, Mercy found one way to cling to her daughter. She whittled a figure from wood smuggled to her by a sympathetic guard. The doll was not beautiful. Its head was too large, its limbs stiff, its surface scarred with knife marks, yet there was something in its shape that carried love, that fragile attempt to give a piece of comfort when all else was about to be torn away. Mercy traced faint lines across its chest patterns, some later believed to be protective charms, others to be symbols of darker pacts. When she pressed the toy into her daughter's hands before her final march to the gallows, she whispered words that no one recorded. Some say they were prayers, others swear they were invocations. Temperance clutched the doll to her chest as the noose claimed her mother. In the weeks that followed, her eyes grew hollow. She was seen wandering the edges of Salem's woods, whispering to the doll as though it answered. Some heard laughter when no other child was near. Others claimed that the doll's eyes glimmered faintly in the candlelight, glassy orbs that followed movements in the dark. Then, as suddenly as smoke vanishing in wind, Temperance disappeared. Some said she died of fever, her body quietly buried without record. Others whispered that she fled into the forest, never to be seen again. But the doll remained. It resurfaced years later, found in the attic of a colonial house, its surface darkened, its features eerily worn as though by unseen hands. And with it, strange stories began to coil through Salem like ivy. Families who kept it reported cold drafts sweeping rooms where windows were sealed. Children who touched it woke screaming from dreams of ropes tightening around their throats. Ministers declared it a relic of witchcraft, yet none dared burn it. Whenever fire came near, the flames sputtered and died. Over the centuries, the doll passed from home to home, often in secret. It was never displayed openly, never boasted of. Those who had it wanted it gone, but the act of removing it was never simple. The doll seemed to return, tucked in corners, waiting in basements, surfacing in trunks long forgotten. One sailor claimed he hurled it into the ocean, only to find it on his doorstep upon his return, dripping salt water onto his boots. A merchant swore he sold it to a collector in Boston, yet the next morning it sat on his mantle, its wooden face turned toward him, expression unchanged. Yet somehow REPROACHFUL. In time, the haunted ghost doll became part of Salem's deeper mythology. Not the tourist-friendly stories painted on signs or recited by guides, but the kind of tale told only when the lights were low. Locals spoke of it as though it were a wound that never healed. They described the air around it as heavy, difficult to breathe, as though the doll itself exhaled sorrow. They said its eyes were never quite the same twice, sometimes dull, sometimes gleaming, sometimes holding the reflection of faces that were not present. The historians tried to dismiss it, of course. To them, it was superstition, folklore clinging to a town already drenched in ghostly reputation. Yet even skeptics admitted that Salem had no shortage of haunted places. Why not one haunted thing? And among those things, why not a doll? A toy that should be innocent, yet becomes uncanny the moment it stares too long, too silently. Dolls have always been mirrors of us, replicas of flesh, stripped of spirit. Yet here was one that seemed to have drawn spirit into itself. To speak of the doll is to speak of Salem's greatest wound, the children. While the trials are remembered for the women and men hanged, one forgets how many children were caught in the frenzy. Some accused, some left orphaned, some scarred forever by the sight of their parents bound and condemned. The doll, many say, carries that collective grief, that sense of innocence betrayed. It is not merely one spirit but many, all pressed into its wooden frame like ashes packed in an urn. Those who claim to have encountered it in modern times describe not terror at first, but sorrow. They hear soft weeping, feel the urge to comfort, to reach out, and only then does the unease unfurl. The weeping grows louder though the doll's mouth never moves. The wood feels damp as though it has absorbed tears. And then, when the room falls silent again, something remains: a presence, a gaze, an understanding that you have been marked by history itself. The story that follows is not one of witches alone, nor of simple hauntings. It is the story of how grief, injustice, and unburied memory can crystallize into something unyielding. It is a story of how Salem's ghosts found a vessel in wood and cloth, how a mother's gift became a town's curse, how the haunted Ghost Doll of Salem continues to breathe long after lungs have rotted. It begins, as all hauntings do, with silence. A silence broken by whispers, by creaks in the floorboards, by the weight of unseen eyes. A silence that stretches across centuries, until you are no longer sure whether you are remembering or imagining. And in the center of that silence sits the doll, waiting. The doll's story might have ended as folklore, a half-believed tale whispered by Salem's elders to frighten restless children into silence. But history has a way of leaking forward, of finding cracks through which to seep into the present. The haunted Ghost Doll of Salem was never content to remain in the shadows of rumor. Those who brushed against its path learned that it was not simply a story. It was an infection of spirit, a thing that clung, that spread, that demanded recognition. The earliest modern record came from 1873, when a family named Whitcomb inherited a crumbling colonial house near Charter Street. In the attic, tucked behind warped beams, they discovered a small wooden trunk. Inside lay linens eaten by moths, a rusted locket, and the doll. At first, the Whitcombs thought little of it. Their daughter, 7 years old, carried the doll with her down the stairs and held it close. She called it my whispering friend, though no one had told her its story. It was not long before the child changed. She stopped playing outdoors, stopped singing. She spent hours locked in her room, rocking the doll, murmuring in low tones. When asked what she said, she replied only, "I'm listening." At night, her parents would hear laughter echoing through the halls, high and sharp, though their daughter lay silent in her bed. One evening, Mrs. Whitcomb swore she saw her daughter's lips move in her sleep while across the room. The doll's glassy eyes glimmered faintly, catching light that had no source. By winter, the girl fell ill. Physicians called it a wasting fever, but no remedy eased her. On her final night, her mother claimed to hear two voices whispering from her daughter's chamber, one weak and childlike, the other older, heavier, filled with anguish. When the door was opened, only the child remained. The doll clutched to her chest, its wooden lips pressed against her cheek, as though in a kiss. The girl was dead by dawn. The Whitcombs buried their daughter and locked the doll back in the trunk, which they sealed in the cellar. Yet, within weeks, scratching sounds echoed through the floors. Objects shifted in the night. Servants refused to remain in the house. The Whitcombs fled by spring, leaving everything behind. When neighbors finally entered to claim the property, they found the trunk open and the doll perched on the kitchen table, its face turned toward the door, as if in greeting. Stories like these grew more frequent. Each retelling added layers, but certain patterns remained the same. The doll never stayed hidden for long. Wherever it appeared, grief followed. Children were drawn to it with a magnetism that defied reason. Adults felt sometimes sorrow, sometimes dread, always a heaviness pressing against their ribs, as though unseen hands tightened from within. But the haunting was not limited to sorrow. There were other, darker manifestations. One account, written in the diary of a schoolteacher named Abigail Morton in 1902, spoke of dreams that blurred into waking hours. She had borrowed the doll for a town exhibition on Salem's history, intending to showcase it as a curiosity. That night, she dreamed of the gallows, ropes swaying, voices praying. A child stood at her side, clutching the doll. When Abigail turned, the child's face melted into her own, her eyes wide with terror as the rope tightened around her neck. She awoke, gasping for breath, bruises blooming across her throat, though no rope had touched her. Abigail returned the doll the very next morning, but her dreams never ceased. She grew gaunt, her nights filled with visions of spectral children lining her classroom, their eyes empty hollows, their mouths moving in silent unison, as if repeating a lesson she could not hear. In her final entry, scrawled with a trembling hand, she wrote, "The doll is not one spirit, but many. They gather inside. They want to be remembered. They want to be carried. They want to be more than whispers." She was found lifeless weeks later, her face turned toward the corner of her room, where the doll had once been stored. The haunting of the doll deepened as Salem itself embraced its ghostly reputation. By the mid-20th century, when tourism flourished and witchcraft became spectacle, the doll emerged once more, this time in the hands of collectors and paranormal investigators. Each swore they could contain it, study it, prove or disprove its power. Each failed. A collector named Thomas Harrow displayed the doll in a glass case in his home, daring visitors to feel its energy. Those who entered spoke of sudden chills, headaches, visions of ropes dangling from the ceiling beams. A photographer attempted to capture its likeness, but the film developed with streaks of light resembling grasping fingers. The doll itself never appeared clear, its edges blurred as though refusing to be pinned to paper. Harrow's health declined rapidly. Within months he died of heart failure. The doll was found beside him in bed, though he swore before his death that he had sealed it. In his study, what unnerved witnesses most was the doll's refusal to remain still. Though it did not walk or move in ways one could see directly, it was always somewhere unexpected, perched on a chair when left on a shelf, sitting upright when placed flat, facing the opposite direction from before. Those who lived with it grew accustomed to the sound of faint footsteps at night, too light for an adult, too deliberate for the settling of wood. A few reported voices, children whispering in corners, a woman's low humming as though soothing a baby. Once, a visitor swore she heard her own mother's lullaby. Though her mother had been dead for decades, the doll seemed to know the deepest wounds of those around it and shape its manifestations accordingly. To widows, it sang. To soldiers, it cried. To children, it smiled. And always, its glass eyes gleamed with an unnatural awareness, as though the spirits trapped within were peering outward, searching for escape. By the 1980s, whispers claimed the doll had been taken into the care of a private occult society. They bound it in wards, circled it with salt, enclosed it in glass etched with protective sigils. Yet those who visited claimed the glass fogged from the inside, as though breath pressed against it. Others said they saw tiny handprints in the condensation, too small for any living child. The society refused to confirm or deny these claims, but the legend persisted. Salem, of course, leaned into its haunted reputation. Tour guides alluded to the doll in hushed tones, though none could say for certain where it rested. Some claimed it was still housed in a museum, hidden in a back room. Others believed it had been returned to an attic, sealed away. A few suggested it traveled, appearing where it wished, carried by no one, bound to no location. The mystery only made it stronger, but for those who encountered it directly, there was no mystery, only terror. Witnesses described an oppression that settled like a storm cloud. One man recounted seeing his reflection in its glass eyes, but not as he was older, gaunt, with rope burns around his neck. Another swore the doll whispered his name at night, drawing him toward it until he woke standing over the case, hand trembling as he reached for it. The haunting became undeniable. Salem's ghost doll was no trinket of folklore. It was a vessel, a prison, a voice for the unquiet dead. And like the town itself, it thrived on remembrance. The more it was spoken of, the more it was fed. There are those who believe the doll is not haunted by Salem's victims alone. that over the centuries, as it passed through hands and homes, it collected more spirits of children lost to fever, women broken by grief, men cut down in Warsaw, drawn into its wooden chest, all bound to its silence. If true, the doll is no longer a relic of Salem's past, but a moving graveyard, a host for souls unnumbered. And yet, the doll does not rage blindly. Its hauntings are not mindless. They are deliberate, purposeful. It chooses whom to torment, whom to comfort, whom to destroy. To some it brings visions of sorrow, to others terror, to a rare few something like protection. This selectivity unsettles more than any violent outburst. It suggests intelligence. It suggests will. It suggests that whatever inhabits the doll is not only aware, but waiting, watching, choosing. And as Salem's streets darken each October, as lanterns glow against the night and tourists walk laughing through the haunted air, there are those who swear they feel it, eyes that do not belong, a presence among them, a doll small enough to cradle in a child's arms, yet heavy with centuries of death, whispering still. The haunted Ghost Doll of Salem is not merely a story of what once was. It is a haunting that breathes, that spreads, that builds, and what it builds toward, none can say. For every haunting hungers for its climax, its revelation, its moment when silence finally breaks, and in Salem, the silence grows thinner every year. There are hauntings that rattle windows, slam doors, and scream in the night. They are violent, noisy things, demanding to be known. But the most terrifying hauntings are quieter, the kind that creep beneath your skin, the kind that make you doubt where your thoughts end and something else begins. The haunted Ghost Doll of Salem belonged to the latter kind, subtle yet unrelenting, a presence that did not shout but whispered until its whispers became the only voice you could hear. For years the doll had passed through hands like a cursed inheritance, each new keeper believing they might control it, understand it, perhaps even exploit it. But there comes a moment in every haunting when the balance shifts, when the spirit no longer clings timidly to its vessel, but stretches outward, demanding more. Salem, a city already saturated in ghosts, proved to be the perfect stage for that escalation. The breaking point began in the autumn of 1997. A paranormal research group from Boston, eager to stake their reputation in Salem's booming supernatural tourism, announced that they had obtained the infamous Ghost Doll. They called themselves the Order of the Veil, though in truth they were little more than enthusiasts armed with tape recorders and cameras. They claimed they would host a public seance on Halloween night, unveiling the doll to prove or disprove the legends once and for all. The event drew hundreds. The hall they rented, a creaking Masonic lodge whose walls already hummed with strange histories filled with locals and tourists alike. Candles were lit, the air heavy with incense, and on a small wooden table at the center of the room sat the doll, placed inside a glass case etched with protective sigils. Its eyes, dull in the dim light, seemed to watch everything at once. The seance began with predictable theater, chanting calls to spirits, the crackling of tape recorders. But as the night deepened, something undeniable shifted. The air grew dense, pressing against lungs, forcing breaths shallow. A cold spread through the hall, not the draft of winter, but a deeper chill that felt as though it seeped from inside the bones. The leader of the group, a man named Victor Hale, spoke boldly into the darkness. He called upon the spirits of Salem, upon the victims of injustice, upon the condemned to make themselves known. His words echoed, swallowed by silence. Then, faint at first, came the sound children's laughter, high-pitched and overlapping, as though a dozen voices played in the shadows. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, nervous chuckles masking unease. The doll's case fogged from within, small handprints pressed against the glass, clear as frost patterns. Gasps broke the silence. Hale tried to steady his voice, declaring the manifestation's proof of energy, of presence. But his words faltered when the case rattled violently, shaking as though something within struggled to break free. The sigils etched into the glass glowed faintly before fading into ash, flaking away as if burned invisible. And then, with a sound sharp as a crack, the glass shattered. The doll sat motionless on the table, yet the room convulsed. Lights flickered, candles guttered out. The crowd screamed as a wind surged through the hall, though the windows were sealed tight. Voices rose, hundreds, thousands, layered upon one another. Prayers, curses, cries, songs. They poured from the walls, from the floor, from the very air, until the hall was a storm of sound, Witnesses would later disagree on what they saw next. Some swore they saw children, translucent and pale, clinging to the walls. Others claimed ropes dangled from the rafters, swinging as though bodies had just dropped. A few whispered of a woman, tall and gaunt, standing behind the doll with her hands resting on its shoulders, her face shadowed, but her eyes burning like coals. What all agreed upon was the scream. It tore through the hall with a force that rattled ribs, not the scream of one, but of many, woven together into a single endless note. People collapsed, covering their ears, yet the sound was not only heard, but felt inside skulls, inside hearts. When it ceased, silence returned so abruptly that it felt like drowning. And there, still sitting, still unchanged, was the doll. Its wooden lips curved upward, not into a smile, not into malice, but into something unreadable, something like recognition. The séance ended in chaos. Dozens fled. A few fainted. Victor Hale collapsed at the table, his eyes rolled back, his mouth moving as though he still chanted, though no sound emerged. He never recovered his speech, living out his remaining years in silence, scribbling incoherent symbols in notebooks until his death. The doll vanished that night. Some claimed the Order of the Veil locked it away again. Others insisted it disappeared on its own. No official record was kept, but Salem changed after that. Reports of hauntings surged on, just of the doll, but throughout the town. Visitors spoke of shadows following them through the streets, of whispers in hotel rooms, of dolls in shop windows blinking when no one touched them. Locals avoided certain alleys after dusk, claiming the air grew too heavy, too thick to breathe. And still, the doll's story pressed onward. A museum curator named Ellen Graves claimed to have acquired it secretly in 2004. She kept it hidden, showing it only to select researchers. One of them described entering the locked room where it sat, only to find the doll already waiting on the chair nearest the door. He swore he had never seen it move, but each time he blinked, it was closer. He left the room and never returned. Elon's notes, later found in her belongings after her sudden death, described visions she experienced in the doll's presence. She saw the execution ground of Gallows Hill, not as history, but as immediacy. Bodies swinging, crowds chanting, a little girl clutching the doll beneath her cloak. Ellen claimed the doll spoke not aloud, but in her mind. Its voice was not one, but many, shifting, overlapping. Sometimes it asked for remembrance, sometimes it asked for justice, sometimes it whispered only her name, over and over, until she screamed for it to stop. The doll, Ellen wrote, was not bound to Salem. It was Salem. The grief, the guilt, the centuries of memory too heavy for stone alone had been absorbed into it, concentrated, given form. It was no longer just a mother's gift to her child. It was the embodiment of every silence, every shadow, every soul that had refused to rest. And then came the night Ellen disappeared. Her house stood empty, her journals scattered across the floor. Neighbors swore they saw her walking into the woods, barefoot, the doll cradled in her arms. She was never seen again. In the center of her study sat the doll, perched on her chair, its eyes turned toward the window, as if watching the trees. From that moment on, the legend of the haunted Ghost Doll of Salem shifted. It was no longer just about a cursed toy, but about a convergence, a point at which the veil between living and dead thinned. The doll became the axis around which Salem's spirits turned, the focal point of its endless haunting. And with that realization came dread. For if the doll was not merely an artifact but a vessel for all Salem's dead, then its hunger was not yet satisfied. It was growing, stretching, reaching. And every October, when the town filled with voices calling its name, when the past was paraded and sold, it was fed anew. The climax of a haunting is not always fire or blood. Sometimes it is recognition, a slow dawning that what you thought was legend is instead alive and waiting. For Salem, that climax was not a single night, but an unfolding, year by year, as more came to believe, more came to speak, more came to give the doll exactly what it wanted: remembrance. And in that remembrance, the dead stirred. Stories of hauntings rarely end. They taper off, fray into whispers, scatter like ashes into the wind. A haunted house can be boarded up, a cursed field abandoned, a restless spirit banished at least for a time. But the haunted Ghost Doll of Salem was never confined by brick or soil. It moved, it traveled, it adapted. Its story did not end because it could not. After Ellen Graves' disappearance, the doll slipped back into shadow, but it was not gone. Salem thrived in its absence. Tourists still poured in each October. Merchants still sold replicas of noose pendants and witches' hats. Guides still led lantern-lit tours of haunted corners. Yet beneath the surface, something shifted. The air in Salem became heavier. Visitors spoke of a strange sensation of being watched, not by the ghosts of the trials, but by something smaller, closer, more intimate, like a pair of eyes staring up from waist height, unblinking. Locals began to whisper about the doll. Some swore they saw it peering from the second-story windows of abandoned shops. Others claimed it appeared in photographs where no doll had been present, sitting at the edge of a bench or tucked into the corner of a frame. A tour guide recounted how a guest fainted mid-sentence when he felt a tiny wooden hand grip his own. He awoke, whispering a child's nursery rhyme that no one recognized, repeating it until his voice cracked. The doll, it seemed, no longer waited to be found. It went looking. In 2010, a family visiting from Ohio reported that their young daughter returned from a Salem gift shop clutching a doll they had not purchased. When they tried to take it from her, she screamed until her voice broke. They left Salem that night, the doll still in her arms. Weeks later, their house burned to the ground under circumstances investigators never fully explained. The family survived, but the girl was found sitting in the yard among the ashes, clutching nothing but charred wood carved into the shape of a face. That same year, a video began circulating online. Grainy, shaky, filmed in the dim light of Salem's streets, it showed a child's figure holding what appeared to be a doll. As the camera zoomed closer, the child's face blurred, dissolving into static, while the doll's face remained sharp, clear, staring straight at the lens. The video vanished within days. Accounts that shared it mysteriously deleted. Still, fragments of the clip resurface from time to time, like a ghost refusing to be erased. And so the doll seeped into the digital age. In forums, on late-night radio shows, in whispered podcasts, its story grew. Each retelling gave it new fuel. For if Ellen Graves was right that the doll thrived on remembrance, then every story told was an offering. Every fearful glance a thread, strengthening its weave. Salem itself seemed to conspire. Each October, as the veil thinned, the city bloomed with the doll's presence. Shop windows fogged with small handprints. Dolls on shelves turned their heads ever so slightly. Guests in hotels woke to find children's laughter in hallways empty of footsteps. The doll was no longer one artifact, but many shadows, many echoes, each carrying its hunger. And yet, no one could prove it. Museums denied possession. Collectors whispered in secret. Some claimed it had left Salem altogether, shipped overseas, lurking now in basements of private estates in London, Paris, Tokyo. Others argued that the doll could never leave, that its wooden heart was bound to Salem's soil, as surely as the roots of the gallows that once bore the weight of the condemned. Still, questions remained. Why did it linger? What did it want? Some believed it sought justice, an endless attempt to be heard on behalf of the silenced. Others thought it was something darker, that the doll was less a victim and more a predator, feeding not on memory but on fear, using Salem's past as a mask for its own growing appetite. One theory, whispered among occult scholars, was more disturbing still. They suggested that the doll was not haunted at all, not by one spirit, nor even many, but that it was alive in its own right, not born of flesh, but born of belief. The child who once clutched it at Gallows Hill did not pass into it. Rather, her terror, her grief, her love ignited something inside the wood itself. A soul made from sorrow, carved by history, nurtured by centuries of fear. In this telling, the doll was not a vessel, it was the ghost. And if that was true, then destroying it would mean nothing. For how do you destroy belief? How do you unmake what is made not of matter but of memory? The ending then was not an ending at all, but an opening. Every October, the doll's legend expands, spreading outward like roots beneath cobblestones. Tourists laugh and take selfies, unaware that their very recognition, their very acknowledgement, feeds it. Paranormal seekers search for it. Each blog post, each podcast episode, another invocation. Even skeptics are not safe, for disbelief is still attention, and attention is still energy. Perhaps that is the true haunting of Salem, not the witches, not the ghosts, not even the doll itself, but the realization that once something is remembered, it can never fully die. Memory is a resurrection, each telling a summoning, and in that sense, the haunted Ghost Doll of Salem has already won. For as you read these words, you have thought of it. You have pictured its face, its eyes, its small wooden hands pressing against glass. You have given it space in your imagination, a corner of your mind where it now sits quietly, waiting. And should you ever visit Salem, should you walk its cobbled streets at dusk, listen carefully. In the shuffle of footsteps, in the chatter of tourists, in the creak of old wooden doors, you may hear it, a soft laugh, a small hand against your own, a voice whispering your name. The doll is never gone, it only waits.